Please welcome Rodney Alcala.
I'll take one.
Factor number 1.
It was one of the most famous dating shows ever.
Looking back, it is chilling to realize that this iconic show would unknowingly feature a remorseless killer.
The horror story begins.
I remember wanting to jump out of the car.
The so-called dating game killer is one of the country's most notorious criminals, but one most people have never heard of.
He had sociopathic personality traits. He had no shame.
He walks up and down the streets and asks people if he could take their picture.
What better place to be a sexual predator than to go to a feeding frenzy like New York?
She'd been strangled with nylon stockings.
It's the talk of the town.
Rodney Alcala has murdered at least 5 women. The FBI put Rodney Alcala on the 10 most wanted list.
Oh my God, will Alcala get away with it?
The body count is piling up. He goes on the hunt for more victims, and there's absolutely nothing to stop him.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sometimes I think Chris was probably hitchhiking, probably looking to get away somewhere, and he just probably stopped for her.
She's by herself. She could have met him at a gas station while he's filling up. Can you give me a lift? But somewhere along the lines, I think he was giving her a ride someplace. I don't think she had any indication what was about to happen to her.
Chris was very trusting, so, you know, that was her downfall. My sister Christine was born Christine Ruth Thornton, but we always called her Chris. She was 11 years older than me. Chris was tall. She was 5'10", dark hair, dark eyes, just, you know, a beautiful person inside and out. In the summer of '77, Chris was just 27 years old. Chris was in San Antonio. She was pregnant at the time.
Christine was a free spirit. She kind of went where the wind blew her.
She met up with her boyfriend and, you know, had this crazy idea of going to Montana to pan for gold.
And my understanding is that they were in southwest Wyoming and had an argument ensued between the two of them, and he left her pregnant and alone, and I believe that's the last time anybody had ever seen her.
In the summer of '78, I decided to go down to San Antonio and do some investigating of my own. I actually tried to find her boyfriend, but did not have a good address for him. The San Antonio police refused to take a missing persons report on Chris because she was an adult.
I believe throughout all the years that Christine was missing, I think Kathy was always looking for a way to open up that door of where she is. In '82, this herder out in the middle of nowhere comes across a pile of bones, obviously human remains.
What they found was it was a body of a 25 to 35-year-old female. Along with her bones were also bones of an infant.
There wasn't any identification, and so we remained cold for many years.
And investigators never imagined that those bones would lead them to a notorious serial killer a man I would later be called upon to prosecute. And this photograph, discovered by police, would lead a heartbroken family to their loved one, missing for almost 40 years. Her smile shared by a tragic list of young women and girls who trusted a charming stranger, only to discover a dark secret that began back in the fall of 1968.
So 68 was tumultuous. It was sort of flower power, free living. It was quite a era and quite a year.
Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy have been assassinated. Andy Warhol was shot that year. And there have been urban uprisings throughout the 60s.
Being a police officer in Los Angeles or anywhere in the country for that matter at that time, everything was anti-war, anti-establishment.
And it's commented on by some of the leading vocalists of the day. You had Barry McGuire in 1965 doing Eve of Destruction.
Eastern world, it is exploding.
You had Bob Dylan, of course, doing Hard Rain's Gonna Fall.
Hard rain's gonna fall.
So what we're seeing is the influence of the new freedoms represented by the counterculture be appropriated by mainstream culture. And that includes daytime television. That even includes game shows like The Dating Game.
The Dating Game began with Chuck Barris back in, I believe it was 1965. He had dealings with ABC, and he just came up with the idea, and he pitched it to a couple of people. It caught on right away.
The premise was a female asking questions of three bachelors who sat on the other side of a partition. She wasn't able to see them, of course, and she picked one for a date, and then she met the guy that she had picked, and they were awarded a date.
Looking back, it is chilling to realize that this iconic show, celebrating love and romance, would unknowingly feature a remorseless killer.
And from the mid-60s onward, Southern California is a mecca for anyone looking to reinvent him or herself and have a fantastic time. They're all partying at some of the hotels on the Strip, like the Chateau Marmont.
Tali Shapiro was an 8-year-old little girl who lived at Chateau Marmont, which is a famous hotel in California.
Her father was a music industry executive. She had a mother and a sister and a brother. And they were living there because their house had gone on fire, and they were staying there temporarily. And a car pulls up alongside of her.
And it's this man who says, "Oh, it's okay, I'm not a stranger. I know your parents. I'm friends with your parents."
And she thought, well, maybe I'll get in the car.
Well, fortunately, a good citizen looks at this and says, I don't like the looks of this.
Tali Shapiro was 8 years old, and it was a beautiful sunny day in September.
And this adorable little girl would skip to school each morning, carefree, loving, wearing her little white Mary Janes. And then the horror story of Tali begins.
I remember the morning was nice and warm because I wore the dress that my nanny had crocheted for me.
And a car pulls up alongside of her, and the man leans out and says, I have a beautiful picture I'd like to show you.
And I guess asked if I needed a ride to school. And I told him I didn't talk to strangers.
And he pulled up alongside of her a little further, kept trolling her.
And that's when he told me he knew my parents. And I really didn't want to get in the car, but I was raised to respect my elders. I got in the car, that's when he asked what time my school started, and then that's when he realized we had plenty of time and he was going to swing by and show me a poster. You know, I didn't know to fear people.
Well, fortunately, a good citizen looks at this and says, I don't like the looks of this. And he actually follows him to his apartment.
The moment I felt danger was when he wanted to go by his place. And I remember wanting to jump out of the car.
So the Good Samaritan, he actually followed the car to a residence where the man took the little girl out of the car and walked her inside, and that didn't look right.
And he calls the police. He says, you know, this is real hinky looking. I don't like it. There's this little girl. You know, I think you ought to check it out.
I don't remember going up to the apartment, and I don't remember anything after that.
I was driving down Sunset heading toward West Hollywood when I received a call to go see a man about a possible kidnapping. I followed him over to the location. At that time, I thought, okay, I better call in for a backup. So I went and called in and requested a backup unit. I went to the front door and started knocking. I could hear someone running around.
So the man came and he opened up the curtains a little bit and peered out and said, "Oh, sorry, I was in the shower. I'll be right there."
I see this male person on the other side, no clothes, not dripping with water, no towel. And I said, "Oh, okay, you need to open the door right now. I need to come in." And he said, wait, let me put my pants on. And I said, "Okay, you got 3 seconds." I probably waited 5 seconds and I kicked the door in. To the right was a dining room, to the left was a living room, and straight ahead was a kitchen. And here was this little girl, blood all over the place, clothes, shoes, and a dress thrown to one side. There was coins on the floor, and she had this steel bar across her neck, which probably weighed 2 pounds.
And there's an image that I will never forget. It's an image of this pipe used to strangle her with, essentially. Press it against her throat, and more blood than should ever be able to come out of a little 8-year-old girl next to these Mary Jane shoes on the floor of this kitchen.
I looked at her, I thought she was dead, she wasn't breathing. The other officers came around, we were looking for the suspect. I went back to check on Telly, and I just couldn't leave her there like that.
The officer had a sort of a life or death decision to make. Chase this man out the back and catch him, or render life-saving aid to the little girl and save her life. And he chose the little girl.
And as I went back in the kitchen, she started gagging, Telly. So then that put everything into high gear. But when I was yelling, the officer that was covering the back door thought I was asking for help. So he ran to the front to help me. We later found out the suspect escaped through the back door.
Telly was bleeding out, literally clinging to life. Fortunately, there was already an ambulance racing to the scene.
Tally arrived in the emergency room, and the doctor said there was no chance of saving her. And after she had been taken by the ambulance, they started looking around the apartment to see if there were any clues as to who the person was.
I found his ID. We determined he was a student at UCLA in the photography department.
And the name of the man who attended UCLA was Rodney Alcala.
They searched that house, and there are references in reports of hundreds and hundreds of photographs of young women and boys in various stages of dress, in various stages of vulnerability that were in Rodney Alcala's possession.
We had to find this Rodney Alcala. We had to get him off the street, because if he would do that to a little 8-year-old girl, there's no telling what he would do.
You know, it was just by, sheer luck that Tally didn't die. She should have died, but she didn't.
She was in a coma for 32 days. Nobody thought that she would survive, and miraculously, she pulled through.
She was able to get back on her feet after several months in the hospital.
My parents mentioned nothing. It was never brought up. It was never spoken about. I remember walking into my classroom and everyone looking at me like I was supposed to be dead.
And her parents had just had enough. They could not stay in California another minute.
They moved out of the country shortly after that. They moved to Mexico. The father wanted to give her a better, safer environment to live in.
And that's where they stayed for the next many years.
Rodney Alcala has gotten away, and now he's fled, and nobody knows where he's gone.
I was a police officer with LAPD. This was one of my very first cases, actually, and it was 4 or 5 months old at that time, and he was in the wind. I went out and interviewed a number of his professors at UCLA. One of the things they told me is, you got the wrong guy. Rod Alcala is a super guy. He wouldn't hurt a flea. Really nice guy.
Police wanted to know, who is Rodney Alcala, and why would this well-liked 25-year-old college student so viciously attack an 8-year-old little girl?
This is San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo.
Rodney Alcala was born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bucor on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas. He had an older brother, Raul. He had an older sister, and then he had a younger sister.
His family lived in Mexico for a while.
The grandma passed away, and the father left the family.
They ended up moving to Los Angeles area, to Monterey Park. He had everything he wanted, Alcala. He went to Catholic schools. He went to, private schools.
Everyone who knew him said he was a kind boy, a respectful boy, and highly intelligent.
Rodney Alcala had every advantage that somebody could have in life. He had a mother who loved him, which is a big deal psychologically. He had friends. He had brothers and sisters who all turned out to be very successful.
His older brother was already at West Point, so this is a pretty, patriotic family.
And then he joined the Army in the early 60s, and that's where the trouble really began for Rodney Alcala.
So Alcala didn't fare well in the Army. He went AWOL a few times, got in some trouble.
As it turns out, this bright, handsome young man with the promising future had nightmarish urges that he refused to ignore.
So 1963, he gets a pass in the military. He ultimately goes to New York. While in New York, he assaults a girl. He hits her over the head with a Coke bottle. That girl was able to run away.
He had sociopathic personality traits. He had no shame, and he didn't, feel guilty about anything that he did.
The military felt that he had a nervous breakdown. That was their analysis of it. The psychiatrists at the hospital felt it was a lot more serious than that. But he was discharged honorably, and not a blemish on his record.
So he ends up coming back to California, where he enrolls in the UCLA Fine Arts program as a photography major.
So Rodney Alcala is actually attending UCLA and living less than a mile away from Chateau Marmont when he attacks Tally Shapiro in 1968, and then seems to vanish.
I was pretty much convinced he'd gone to Mexico, because he had relatives in Mexico.
So it's been 3 years now since the rape of Tally Shapiro. The FBI eventually became interested in the case and put Rodney Alcala on the 10 most wanted list.
So I get a phone call, and it's the FBI in New Hampshire. Say, hey, we've got your guy in custody, Rodney James Alcala.
It seemed like an open and shut case, but it was just the beginning of what would become a pattern of catch and release that would continue for more than a decade. While the FBI is on the hunt for Rodney Alcala, he's actually living on the East Coast under an assumed name, John Berger.
So in 1968, John Berger walks into NYU and applies to their School of the Arts. So there he was in New York, a fugitive, now for 3 years.
What better place to be a sexual predator than go to a feeding frenzy like New York?
So New York in the early 70s is certainly, from the civic standpoint, rather challenged. It's Mayor Lindsay's second term. He's having a hard time delivering services to people. Snow removal, garbage, police feel like they're under siege. Crime is certainly up, violent crime.
And it's during this crime wave in New York City that Alcala is able to fly under the radar, and he strikes again.
Cornelia Crilly grew up in Queens. She had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, Catholic family, very well respected in the neighborhood. They had a very happy childhood.
She was beautiful. She had long, beautiful Irish hair and Irish eyes, big smile, very friendly and funny.
A few years after high school, Cornelia met Dream Man, Leon Borstein, and they began dating.
I was 29 or 30. She was probably 23 at the time.
She wanted to become a TWA stewardess. At that time, they were known as ambassadors to the world and had a lot of prestige. And once she was accepted, she got an apartment with a couple of her stewardess friends on East 83rd Street.
In fact, in the east side of Manhattan, an area becomes known as the Girl Belt because for the first time, young women are living on their own and experiencing their careers as they never had in the past.
I had gotten a job in a Brooklyn DA's office. So in the middle of the day, I got a call from her mother saying she couldn't find her. I said, okay, when I leave, I'll go find her. I'm sure she's at the apartment.
Mrs. Crilly was trying to get in touch with her daughter, and she didn't answer the phone.
She was living in a building where I could go into the building without a key. I knocked on the door, and there was no response. That's when I called the cops. And they came over. I was at the front door when they broke into the back window. They opened the door. They told me that she had been killed.
She was down on the floor of her New York apartment. She had been strangled with nylon stockings and also had bite marks on her breast. She'd been raped and brutally murdered.
We got a call from the police department that somebody still had to identify the body. So I went over to the morgue.
The Crilly case is very unique because she had just moved in the apartment. She's a new girl. No one knew her. So that was a drawback to the detectives in the beginning.
New York PD has this brutal crime scene and no suspects.
We had almost 2,000 murders that year. It wasn't peace, love, and joy. Detectives had a lot of dead ends with this case. They had nothing, unfortunately, and the case went cold.
Well, still enrolled as a student at NYU, Rodney Alcala, a.k.a. John Berger, actually spent his summers as a counselor at an arts camp in New Hampshire.
So in August of 1971, 2 campers take the little dirt road down to the post office, and all of a sudden it starts pouring. And they run inside the post office to get cover. And they start looking around to see what is in the post office.
And there's the good old FBI 10 Most Wanted list.
They go from one to the next to the next. Each one looks more horrible than the preceding one.
Look at this, and they're like, hey, that's Mr. Berger.
So they go back to the camp and they tell the head counselor, we saw this 10 Most Wanted poster of somebody who looks like our John Berger. So he said, don't say anything to anyone and I'll go down to the post office and take a look. So he comes back, he calls the FBI, and he says, I think we have your man.
I get a phone call and it's the FBI in New Hampshire. Say, hey, we've got your guy in custody, Rodney James Alcala. I said, you've got him in custody. Fantastic.
This has been 3 years that Alcala has been on the lam and that Hodel has been looking for him.
So on the 12th of August, 1971, I, with a partner, picked him up, took him to the airport, flew him back. We got our guy. You know, he's going to prison for at least 20, 30 years. Parents didn't want Tally to testify. They said it'd be too traumatic.
So I think the big fear was, oh my God, you know, will Alcala get away with it?
And what's dangerous in the case of a sociopath is they're very persuasive.
In 1971, Rodney Alcala is arrested in New Hampshire and brought back to L.A. to finally face charges for the rape and attempted murder of Tally Shapiro.
He was very low-key, kind of came off a bit introverted, but I could see his mind functioning. And that's what made this guy so dangerous. He was able to read people very well and stay a step or two or three ahead of them. For him, it was all a kind of a chess game.
Rodney Alcala is charged with all the crimes against Tally Shapiro, which included kidnapping, rape, child molestation, and torture.
It turns out that because Tally and her family were in Mexico, the only charge they could put on him was a plea deal for child molestation. No brutality, no bashing, no raping, no almost killing.
And they wound up giving Rodney Alcala a plea deal where he pled to what's known as an indeterminate sentence. He had 1 year to life in California State Prison.
With an indeterminate sentence, it's sliding, it's not determined. And then the parole board has more flexibility in determining whether someone's been rehabilitated or whether they're a danger to the community. This meant that Rodney Alcala would have yearly parole reviews. And what's dangerous in the case of a sociopath is they're very persuasive.
And he's getting therapy in prison, and they believe that he has shown enough progress that in 34 months, the California Parole Board released Rodney Alcala back into the world.
Not even 3 years. Good behavior, they said. Model prisoner, they said. And he was out on the streets again.
The heartbreaking part about this is that they could have kept him, but in those days, that was an era where they believed so strongly in the power of therapy. But when it comes to fixing psychopaths, it doesn't work.
So Alcala is the luckiest man in the world. He's out on parole, and he's having the best time. He's photographing people, and he one day decides to take a ride, and he starts trolling again.
True to form, 2 months later, Rodney Alcala is caught smoking marijuana on the cliffs of Sunset Beach in Huntington Beach with a 13-year-old girl. And he was caught by park rangers.
So he gets arrested yet again. And this time, he gets 2.5 years, and he's taken to prison.
In June 1977, Rodney Alcala is released again from California State Prison, and he goes in, different parole officer this time, and he asks for permission to go on some vacations.
And the parole officer miraculously says, sure, go ahead. So Rodney heads off to New York. July 1977 in New York was a difficult time for everyone. It was hot, it was steamy, the garbage wasn't being collected.
And you used to read the newspaper, Daily News or the Post. First 20 pages of just violence, 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 every day.
There were a lot of murders going on, including Son of Sam.
During the time of Son of Sam in 1977, the city was afraid. Look, you had a lunatic running around shooting men and women in cars.
Police in New York are on special alert tonight for a psychopathic killer who calls himself Son of Sam.
His favorite targets? Young white women with long dark hair.
During that time, Alcala is taking a lot of photographs. He walks up and down the streets and asks people if he can take their picture. Young boys, young girls, older women, doesn't matter. He just wants to take photographs. And a young woman says, sure, you can take my photograph. And they start talking and they get along. It's very nice. Her name is Ellen Hover.
Ellen was strikingly beautiful. She had long dark hair and long slender arms and legs and carried herself like a dancer.
Her father was the owner of Ciro's in Hollywood, a well-known nightclub where Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin and other people appeared.
Ellen was very trusting of other people. She came from a Hollywood family, grew up in Beverly Hills, and then Great Neck, and then Manhattan. Ellen loved people.
On July 13th and 14th was the famous New York City blackout.
This is an ABC News special report.
New York City went totally dark last night, and tonight large parts of the city still are without power.
It's lawlessness. People loot, crime goes through the roof. You know, people are afraid.
There's no refrigeration, no water, no lights on one of the hottest, steamiest nights of the year in New York City.
It was a very unsettling, hard time for most people.
On July 15th, Ellen Hover goes missing.
That evening, friends tried to get in touch with Ellen. Nobody could.
The phone rang. It was Ellen's mother, Yvonne Schwartz. Mrs. Schwartz asked me if I had heard from Ellen since the weekend, and I said no. The next thing I knew, I was watching the 11 o'clock news, and there was Ellen's picture, New York heiress missing.
And the next day, when the police showed up at her door, they looked inside and they found on her calendar there was an entry that said she was meeting John Berger.
New York City went totally dark last night, and tonight large parts of the city still are without power.
Ellen Hover's disappearance was a huge mystery. This was a very big deal, that this socialite, this young woman who was just gone, missing.
There was nothing in her background that suggested that she would have run away.
It's in the New York Times. It's on posters. It's on the news. It's the talk of the town.
When the police showed up at her door, they looked inside.
Nothing looks like an attack happened there, but they collect evidence and mail, notes, things like that. And one of the things they take is her calendar.
And there was an entry that said she was meeting John Berger.
They research back, and they try to ID who John Berger is.
You're talking about a woman who goes missing in New York City pre-computer. And so Rodney Alcala / John Berger was never really on the radar of the New York City Police Department.
So Alcala goes back to LA, and he's there actually trying to find a job.
Rodney Alcala gets a job with the Los Angeles Times working as a typesetter.
You have to put this into perspective. On the lam for 3 years, 10 most wanted, 2 stints in jail, felon. He applies under his own name, Rodney Alcala, and he gets the job.
He actually would bring in photographs to show some of the people at his work. A lot of the photos were of nude girls. And I think it was like the time when people didn't really question it. You weren't like, oh my God, you're a pedophile. Like instead they were like, oh, he's just kind of strange. You know, he's very artsy.
So 5 months after Alcala is returned to LA, the FBI is actually able to connect the dots between Rodney Alcala, the name John Berger, and the notes found in Ellen Hover's calendar. So Rodney Alcala was eventually questioned by the FBI in relation to the disappearance of Ellen Hover, and he admitted being with her.
Where did you meet Ellen on the 15th?
He said he had taken her up to Westchester to take a picture. They had a lovely time, and that was it. Never saw her again.
Did he recall like dropping her off? That was it.
At that point, they still had not found a body.
Other than him admitting to the crime, saying, I killed her, there wasn't enough to arrest him.
This is Bill McCreary in North Tarrytown with a story about the discovery of the body of a millionaire's daughter missing for the past 11 months.
Ultimately, she's found. It's almost a year later. She's found up in an area by the Rockefeller estate.
They found clothing of hers nearby. They went back to the same site and they discovered her remains.
But it's all skeletal. She's identified through a dental comparison.
Well, police are able to positively identify the remains of Ellen Hover. There is no forensic evidence that leads them to her killer.
1970s was considered a serial killer central.
You have the Hillside Strangler, the Night Stalker, 2 freeway killers. You have the Bedroom Basher. Elsewhere, you have Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy killing people in Chicago.
Recently, there's been a rash of mass murders.
1977 through 1978, many women were murdered.
Police in this era are lacking a lot of the investigative tools they have today. There's no DNA. There's no surveillance camera around every corner. People aren't walking around with a GPS in their pocket.
All of these things lead to this sort of perfect storm for Rodney Alcala, where he's able to remain one step ahead of police, and he goes on the hunt for more victims, and there's absolutely nothing to stop him.
Jill Barkham was a 19-year-old girl in New York who was adventuresome and wanted to take a trip with a friend of hers. And so she left New York for Los Angeles.
Jill and I were very close as children growing up. We were often mistaken as twins. Jill had a very free spirit about her.
Bruce was very sad when she left New York. was very scared for her, being so young at 19 years old.
So November 10th, 1977, I called home and there was crying in the background. They said, you need to come home. You need to come home. And that's all they would say.
Jill Barcombe was found off of Franklin Canyon Road, and it was down the street from Marlon Brando's home at the time. She was found bent over, half naked. Her head was facing the dirt.
She has multiple ligatures on her neck. It was a brutal crime scene.
I came into a house of siblings, distraught, righteously so, and heard it from my mother directly that my sister was dead.
Her face was unrecognizable. Her brother said at the funeral that he couldn't even recognize his sister. It was so mutilated.
I had night terrors the day that Jill's body arrived. It wasn't just murder, it wasn't just rape, it was brutal, it was sadistic. And nobody could understand why the things happened to her.
They thought perhaps this could be the work of the Hillside Strangler, because that's what the Hillside Strangler did. He strangled women and left them on the side of the road.
And it complicated this investigation because Jill Barcombe had a friend when she got out to LA that was actually abducted and murdered by the Hillside Strangler.
In the end, the police were unable to link the murder of Jill Barcombe to the Hillside Strangler, and the case just went cold. That meant the string of murders of young girls and women continued.
Georgia Wickstead was 27 years old. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was a nurse that worked for cardiac care.
She was from Los Angeles. She worked out of the Centinela Hospital and just recently moved to Malibu.
Every morning she would pick up another nurse and they would drive to the hospital together to do their shift. And one morning she didn't show up.
So the police were called to do a welfare check of her in her home. It was discovered that her window was open and the screen was removed. When the police entered her home, there was blood everywhere. Her body was completely naked and strewn on the floor, kind of posed open.
The viciousness and the sadism involved in her murder is so disturbing and so profound.
There was a handprint that was found on the brass bedding, but there was no one to match the palm print to. And again, that case went cold.
And the third person who was found dead in the same way as the other two was Charlotte Lamb.
Charlotte Lamb, in 1978, was a legal secretary living in the Santa Monica area. She had called some friends one night to go out and go dancing in Santa Monica. Her friends decided not to go. Her body was later found in El Segundo, miles away, in an apartment complex she had no connection to.
She had been strangled and she'd been brutally raped and murdered. Her arms had been folded behind her back, which made her back arch to expose her breasts. She'd been posed. It's just very disturbing and incredibly sad.
I met with Rodney 5 or 6 times. I administered assessments with regard to his sexual interests. Many times the rapist, killer, antisocial person will pose dead bodies, and they do want law enforcement and other people to see this. And there's a message in that. The message for Rodney is that I am here, you will remember me.
So instead of hiding in the shadows, Rodney Alcala is almost fearless, and he puts himself out there in perhaps the most public way possible.
Rodney going on the dating game is a great example of him being predatory, him being confident, narcissistic, and of course he wouldn't go on unless he would win.
And 5, 4, 3.
He always wins.
Factor number 1 is a successful photographer. You might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Please welcome Rodney Alcala.
Bachelor number 1. Yes.
What's your best time?
Night times when it really gets good.
In retrospect, it has got to be one of the creepiest moments on TV.
He says, I always get my girl.
The so-called dating game killer is one of the country's most notorious criminals.
They told us that they had found Robin. It was devastating.
There's nothing that hurts like that. Nothing.
Her plan was to shoot Alcala. She wanted to avenge her daughter.
He was a sadistic killer who deserved death.
Model prisoner, they said, and he was out on the streets again.
A pattern of catch and release that would continue for more than a decade.
All these pictures that the police had from a serial killer. His victims are still out there.
So by 1978, the body count is piling up. Rodney Alcala has murdered at least 5 women on 2 coasts and almost murdered a little girl. And he's just about to make his primetime debut.
In the 70s, I was the executive producer and Ellen was the contestant coordinator. The show that Rodney Alcala appeared on aired in September 1978.
The dating game appearance is just a bizarre part about this case. I think that what it reflects is the narcissism and the ego and the arrogance of a serial killer. So he actually tries out for Chuck Berry Productions and becomes a bachelor for the dating game.
He was very striking. I don't know, there was a boldness about him, and he had long black hair. He was just a striking looking person.
In terms of putting him on as a contestant, I think on the form I wrote NW, which was my symbol for no way, no darn way, is this guy gonna be on the show? Because I noticed that he had a very strange personality.
It's like, are you kidding? He's so attractive. Everyone's gonna love him. All the women are gonna love him.
And I said, all right, we'll put him on a show, but we've got to surround him with 2 guys that have personalities and that are respectable and decent and fun.
My name is Jed Mills. When I got the job on the dating game, they said, you're going to be bachelor number 2, so you'll be sitting in the center. Bachelor number 1 is a little creepy. I noticed that right away. In the green room, he jumps in, he says, I always get my girl.
Number 1, would you say hello to Cheryl, please? We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Immediately did not like this guy.
And here we go.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes.
What's your best time?
One of our edicts was to make the show much sexier and much more provocative than the show in the 60s. Everything was sexy in the 70s. So we pushed the envelope.
The best time is at night. Night times when it really gets good.
The sexual innuendo intrigued the audience. They loved it, and they started clapping. Yeah, they loved this guy.
Oddly enough, 42 years later, I still remember Cheryl Bradshaw. She did voices.
And she says, suppose I was auditioning you for a private class, and you're a dirty old man.
You're a dirty old man. Take it.
Come on, over here.
In retrospect, it has got to be one of the creepiest moments on TV.
The audience is beside themselves. They love this.
Cheryl Bradshaw asked about what kind of food he would be if she was going to serve him for dinner.
I'm called the banana, and I look really good.
Can you be a little more descriptive?
Peel me.
In retrospect, it sounds horrible, but at the time, we were looking for raunchy, sexy answers, and that was one. Taken in context now, oh my God.
Rodney's motives for going on the dating game are, in my opinion, part of his personality disorder. He wants a lot of attention and he believes he should have it. He's quite bright and he wants the world to know who he is.
When it became time for the Bachelorette to choose number 1, number 2, or number 3, she said,
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take 1.
Number 1. That's your number 1. All right. This is your date, the Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on and say hello.
She seemed very excited about seeing him. And when he came around, I would say it was a pretty lukewarm togetherness.
She called the office the next day and spoke to Ellen.
She said, Ellen, I can't go out with this guy. There's weird vibes that are coming off of him. He's very strange. I'm not comfortable. Is that going to be a problem? And of course I said no.
I would be very interested in knowing what happened in the days after when the person who chose him would not date him.
Jill Parenteau was a 21-year-old college student and data entry worker. She lived in an apartment by herself.
On June 13th, she went to a Dodger game and came home and was never heard from again.
The next day, she never showed up at work.
When law enforcement entered her home, she was found in her bedroom. Her body was lying next to the bed, very similar to Charlotte Lamb's, where she was laid on her back, fully naked. She had a pillow up behind her back that propped her breasts up.
So this is, again, another avoidable set of killings by this guy that should have stayed in prison. But he didn't even break stride on the continued crimes that he kept committing.
My mom's plan was to shoot Alcala.
In those days, they didn't have metal detectors, or they didn't use them, so she got into the courtroom.
She really didn't care about anything else at that point. She wanted to avenge her daughter.
In 1979, Rodney was living at his mother's house, where he had a separate entrance, and perhaps he lived there because he didn't have to pay any rent.
He had taken a lot of nude photos, and he would send these photos to New York and get paid for them. They would go into pornography magazines. That's what he did.
Not only was Rodney on the lam for 3 years, 10 most wanted, 34 months in prison for tally, 2.5 years in prison for a felony of giving drugs to a minor. He's out. He's free. He's on the prowl again.
On June 20th, 1979, Rodney Alcala leaves his mother's house and drives to Huntington Beach. And he starts in a place called Sunset Beach, which is a little bit north on Pacific Coast Highway, and he runs into a 17-year-old girl on roller skates named Lori Wirtz.
I was with my friend Patty, and we decided to go to Sunset Beach. We were approached by Alcala.
And he says, I'm a photographer, and hey, if you could just, skate this way, I'll take some photos.
And I said, oh, that's okay, I'll just help him out.
And there's a series of these photographs that are taken by Rodney Alcala. He was a formally trained photographer, which really played into his method of luring these women and young girls into vulnerable positions.
It's my opinion with regard to Rodney that deviant behavior is always preceded by deviant fantasy. The taking the pictures, going around looking for little girls, sizing people up.
It's a part of the constellation of the Rodney Alcala killing machine. The encounter with Lori Wirtz is very important for two different reasons. Number one, it shows that he's actually down in Huntington Beach that day, which he later denies. And it also shows that he's actively hunting for his next victim.
He was asking me all kinds of questions, like where I'm from, my name, my age. He tried really hard to get me in the car. He tried to get me in the car and leave my friend on the beach.
She doesn't bite, won't get in his car.
He started to drive away, and I did see that he was driving toward Huntington Beach.
Huntington Beach in 1979 in June was chock full of kids and sunbathers and rollerbladers and people walking on the boardwalks and just having fun.
The vibe in Huntington Beach back in the 70s was pretty easygoing. You felt safe.
Robin Samso was a 12-year-old, blonde, blue-eyed poster child for athleticism and healthy lifestyle.
I'm Robin's oldest sister. We are 2 of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
Robin was the baby of the family. Her brothers, sisters, mother all doted over Robin.
She always had a spirit about her. I mean, everybody that met her fell in love with her.
Rodney Alcala winds up on the beach talking to Bridget Wilbert and Robin Samso.
When Robin and I crossed 14th Street is when I believe he spotted us.
And what he's doing is he's saying, hey, I'm a photographer, you're beautiful, you could be a model, how about you let me take pictures?
And I was having none of it. I was like, no, no. And he reached out and put his hand on Robin's leg. And that's when I grabbed her. I said, like, no, this isn't good.
So one of the moms comes over and is like, who are you? Why are you talking to him? And he scurries off like a cockroach.
Robin had to be at a dance class at 4 o'clock, so she and Bridget went back to Bridget's house.
It was time for Robin to be going because she needed to be in the ballet studio to answer phones. That was how she paid for her ballet.
Robin was running late, so Bridget let her use her bike.
Go get my bike. I said, and don't stop. It was very important to me to say that.
He's in his car. He had maps to Southern California. He had blacked out windows. He had this rolling trap to try to get people in it.
And then my house phone rang, and it was one of Robin's brothers. And he said, is Robin still with you? Has she left? Because she hasn't shown up to ballet.
And there's not a sign of anything, no bike, no person on the side of the road, nothing.
Mom began to worry, and still an hour or so later, when Robin still hadn't returned, she called the police to file a missing persons report.
That was my mom's baby, and my mom cried every day.
Bridget was later introduced to a sketch artist to compile a composite of the individual they'd been talking to on the beach.
And when I was done, I was like, that's him. That is him.
It's Rodney Alcala. I mean, you look at that and it's Rodney Alcala.
Approximately 12 days after Robin went missing, a park ranger in the Sierra Madres at a location called Chantry Flats located some human remains.
But she's been scavenged. And what that means is animals have eaten her.
During their search of the area, they also found a shoe that was identified as belonging to Robin and a beach towel.
And that's how they found this beautiful 12-year-old girl.
I remember I was laying on the couch and the doorbell rang. And I answered the door, and it was the police. They came in and they told us that they had found Robin. And my mom broke down, as well as everybody else, my brothers and I. It was devastating.
Her mother, wanted to see her daughter's body, and they had to explain to her that there is no body. There's a skull and there's bones.
My mom she was never the same. It's like her life just had this big empty hole, and everybody else was just on the outside looking in.
They arrest Rodney Alcala at his mother's house in Monterey Park.
After that, they obtained a search warrant for his mother's residence where he was living.
They get inside Rodney Alcala's residence, and they see a receipt for a self-storage facility in the city of Seattle.
So in really good heads-up police work, paperwork is not a part of the search warrant, so they cannot collect it. But it's in plain sight, so they write down the information.
One of his sisters went to visit Alcala in jail, and they started talking about the storage locker.
And Rodney Alcala is overheard saying words to the effect of, well, it's good that they don't know about the storage locker.
The cops actually overheard the conversation.
And they get inside and they find a treasure trove of evidence. I mean, it breaks the case. They arrest Rodney Alcala, they bring him to Huntington Beach, and they interview him.
Can you show Robin?
After the police interview him, he's very savvy and he gives up very little information and he essentially denies all wrongdoing. They get up to this storage locker in the city of Seattle.
They find thousands of pictures of young people, older people, all kinds of people in compromised positions.
They also find various forms of jewelry, a bunch of different earrings and little keepsakes. Those are trophies.
For Rodney, it's his vehicle for power and control. That's why he keeps things.
I remember them asking my mom to the police department to come and identify some things that they found at a locker in Washington.
2 of the earrings found were gold ball earrings. Robin was described as wearing those earrings on the day that she disappeared.
In 1980, Rodney Alcala was tried for the murder of Robin Samso.
One of the stories that Marianne Connolly, Robin's mom, told was that during the 1980 case, she actually showed up with a gun.
Her plan was to shoot Alcala. She really didn't care about anything else at that point. She wanted to avenge her daughter.
In those days, they didn't have metal detectors, or they didn't use them, so she got into the courtroom.
I remember she was very calm. She just kept saying, everything's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay.
The trial began, and she had her hand on her purse, and she was ready to kill the man who had murdered her daughter.
I do remember her telling me that she heard Robin's voice and told her not to do it. So she had changed her mind.
On May 8th, 1980, the jury on the Robin Samso case deliberated less than 5 hours.
Rodney Alcala was convicted and sentenced to death. He was taken to San Quentin, where he was put on death row. Several years later, an appeal came up. And to everyone's shock and sorrow and horror, the case was repealed.
The verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court because the justices determined that the jurors in the trial had been improperly informed of Alcala's prior sex crimes.
I think that there's been a gross miscarriage of justice for being found guilty of something that I didn't do.
In 1984, we learned that Alcala was getting a new trial. Once again, my mother was completely destroyed.
Just can't believe that we have to be punished for what he did. And that's really what it amounts to. We're the ones that are being punished. It means nothing to him.
In the 1986 retrial of Rodney Alcala, a new prosecutor was assigned. He was very confident in his ability to be able to get a conviction on that. 7 years to the day of Robin Samso's disappearance, the second jury convicted Rodney Alcala and also recommended that he be sentenced to die.
The second time he was found guilty, and he got the death penalty again, and we were extremely happy.
One would think that's the end. He's now going to spend the rest of his life on death row until he gets executed. Well, that wasn't the case. In 2001, Rodney's death penalty was again overturned.
At this point, it's important to remember that Rodney Alcala has been in custody ever since being accused of murdering Robin Samsoe in '79. He's now 58 years old, and life behind bars has taken its toll, not only on Rodney Alcala, but also on the victims' families who've been trying to achieve justice.
Twice Alcala has been convicted and sentenced to death. Twice the convictions were reversed on appeal.
The main reason was an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, meaning that Rodney's attorney had not put forth a strong enough defense on his behalf.
My mom really kind of lost it then.
Every time this happens, it's like losing Robin all over again. I don't know if you've ever lost a child, but there's nothing that hurts like that. Nothing.
Amazingly, at this point, Rodney Alcala has escaped the death penalty 2 times, and now these victims and these families are going to be turning to me and my team to ensure that he's punished for this once and for all. This case was assigned to me back in 2003 when my boss came in and essentially gave me the rundown on it, said that it was going to be a tough one.
That's when Matt Murphy decided to go back to the evidence. And he had that pouch of jewelry that was recovered in the Seattle storage locker reanalyzed for DNA.
Which meant that Rodney's DNA could be put up against the DNA that had been taken decades earlier from the people whom we all believed he had murdered. The DNA matched Charlotte Lamb, Jill Parenteau, Georgia Wickstead, and Jill Barkham.
At that point, Rodney Alcala is clearly now known as a serial killer.
When you get a case like this, the first thing you do is you meet with the family members, and it really drives you. And they say you see the reflection of your victim in the eyes of the people who love them.
I forget a lot of things, except the most important thing I can't forget, and that's her and how she died.
I was the same exact age as Robin Samsoe. We were both 12 years old in 1979, and you connect with your victim.
Matt Murphy was a young, talented, brilliant prosecutor, and the Alcala case would be his 107th homicide.
And now we're going to be in one of my courts in front of one of my judges, and I was going to do everything I could to make sure that he faced justice for what he did.
The third death penalty trial was set for 2010.
Matt Murphy and I ended up being co-counsel on the case once we brought our LA cases down to Orange County.
So we had all these really good professionals that came together.
I came to know Rodney Alcala by being on the Orange County panel of expert witnesses. I met with Rodney. We met a total of 18 hours over a number of days.
And this third time around, 66-year-old Rodney Alcala decides he'll represent himself.
He is a narcissist. He has a genius IQ measured by some. So he's very brilliant and thinks that translates into being able to be a good lawyer for himself in the case.
Alcala's choice to represent himself was a message to Mr. Murphy that he is equal to him. Mr. Alcala's perceptions about his own superiority should never, ever be underestimated.
She's been gagged with a t-shirt shoved down her mouth. I wanted the jury to see the level of violence because one of the things that we needed to prove was torture, so that we needed to prove he intended to inflict pain on these victims.
Alcala would strangle the women into unconsciousness, wait till they wake up, and then strangle them again. He knew exactly what he's doing, and he enjoyed what he was doing.
So these are the facts of the Samsoe case.
Because Rodney Alcala was representing himself, he got to cross-examine the witnesses. And then, of course, question Robin Samsoe's mom.
This is what they look like.
He was questioning my mother about the earrings. trying to create doubt. Alcala tried to argue with my mother.
All the jury sees is the man who murdered this poor woman's daughter cross-examining her.
It was so hard watching her that I think the three of us just sat there and sobbed.
Robin Samso's day in court is today. You make sure that he is held responsible for what happened to that little girl.
Murphy in his closing arguments, I mean, they were fantastic.
He got her into his car, and he drove her up to those mountains. And Rodney Alcala smashed her face in when she was still alive. He brutalized her.
He was rattled after my closing argument, because that's when he first learned, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was.
The day the verdict was read, the courtroom was very still and very quiet.
We, the jury, further find and affix the degree thereof, murder in the first degree.
The verdict was guilty on all charges, across the board, all 5 murders. The evidence that we put in for the penalty phase of the trial focused largely on his prior sexual assaults of Tali Shapiro.
When Matt reached out to me in 2010, he was pretty adamant that he really needed me to come forth and help put Alcala away.
So now we've come full circle from 68 to 79. So bringing Tali Shapiro in as the one who lived, as the one who got away, is very important for a jury to see what a monster Rodney Alcala is.
I was there for the Samso family. I've never been the victim. I've always been the survivor.
If you decide that the death penalty is appropriate punishment, you shouldn't feel too good about it.
After hearing all the evidence, the jury went back to deliberate one more time, and they came back with a verdict in a little less than 2 hours.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, determine that the penalty to be imposed upon defendant Rodney James Alcala to be death.
I feel like Robin's life meant something, even in 12 years. She stopped him from killing anybody else. And I believe that if you would have told her that God was going to use her for this purpose, she would have been okay with it.
I just pray that I live long enough to watch him be executed. I only wish that I could be the one to administer the injection.
In 2019, the state of California placed a moratorium on the death penalty. So that meant that all prisoners on death row, and this included Rodney Alcala, received a stay of execution. This did mean, though, that Robin Samso's mother would not see Rodney Alcala executed.
July 23rd, 2019, my mom passed away. She wanted to see that day that Alcala leaves this earth, that he just does not breathe anymore. And it's unfair. It's unfair. Somebody so cruel and evil.
Cold case investigators tonight saying they have solved 2 of New York City's most notorious murders.
New York had been investigating cases involving Rodney Alcala, a murder in 1971 and a murder in 1977.
Although Alcala is already on death row in California, he will be extradited here to go on trial for killing the 2 New York women.
They decided to charge Rodney with the 2 New York murders.
He conceded that he did kill the 2 women in question.
I was surprised that he pled guilty. I think ultimately he knew he was going to be convicted.
Mr. Alcala got 25 years to life, which is the highest sentence under the law.
After the trial, the Huntington Beach Police Department released hundreds of the photos that they found in that Seattle locker to the general public. Police don't know if any of the people in these pictures were victims of Alcala, but hope the public might be able to help identify them.
After the Huntington Beach Police Department released those photographs, the decades-old mystery of Christine Thornton was about to come full circle.
My son sent this email to me with all these pictures in it that the police had from a serial killer. That was her. That was definitely her. I think, having Christine being gone for so long, it was difficult because, we all knew that something bad had happened to her.
For nearly 40 years, Christine Thornton's family assumed she was dead. She just vanished out of their lives.
In '82, this herder out in the middle of nowhere comes across a pile of bones, obviously human remains.
Several initial deputies responded along with detectives, and what they found was it was a body of a 25 to 35-year-old female.
They also found the bones of an unborn child mixed in, largely all intact. The clothing was still there. Even some jewelry were all located.
They couldn't determine a cause of death. What they believed was that it was possibly a strangulation because one of the pant legs was tied in a ligature.
The detectives at that time they used the skull and sent it off to the crime lab in order to get a reconstruction of what they felt this person looked like. They determined that it was a young female and brunette.
They unfortunately weren't able to identify her, and the case went cold. In 2013, several of the detectives, including myself, were assigned specific cold cases. So this box was almost falling apart when I initially was assigned this case. There was still bone fragment and skin tissue saved at the crime lab after all those years.
If you have DNA, you run it. And then you try to find out by sending it down through CODIS and missing persons to find out if you can get a match.
CODIS refers to the Combined DNA Index System. It was created in 1998. DNA is entered into a national database, and this helps the authorities find missing people and also solve crimes.
I was basically told it was now a waiting game. I honestly thought I'd be 10, 20 years retired before I'd get a phone call saying that they'd identified her.
So in 2013, my son sent an email to me knowing that he had an aunt that he had never met. He knew the story that she went missing, and he came across this article with all these pictures in it that the police had from a serial killer.
Her son found the website that had all the pictures that they found in Alcala's locker up in Seattle.
She looked through all these photographs and kept stopping at that one photograph of beautiful brunette seated on the back of a motorcycle.
And I'm like, I think that's Chris. And sure enough, I looked at her little pinky toe, which I remember. It just was very distinctive. Up on her other toes, and I kind of knew that was her. That was definitely her.
At that point is when she decided to submit her DNA sample as a reference to hopefully identify Christine.
Detective Sheeman came to my office to tell me that they had a match and an identification.
Just shy of 2 years later is when I was off duty and I decided to check my email. The email I received identified my victim from Granger as Christine Ruth Thornton. So this is the copy of the photo that was found in Rodney Alcala's possession. Trying to match this photo out in the Granger Prairie Seems almost impossible, but we were able to match this photograph up just based off of two different ridges. You can actually hold this picture up and actually show that this is almost the exact area that this photograph potentially was taken back in 1977. And here we are in 2020. It was pretty shocking to find this area and to know what transpired here all those years ago. We spoke to detectives with the Huntington Beach Police Department and put a timeline together.
So in July of 1977, with the permission of his parole officer, he's allowed to travel back to New York. And Rodney Alcala wasn't flying. Rodney Alcala was driving. So Rodney Alcala leaves New York, comes back to Los Angeles.
And we determined around the time that Christine was killed, he had been traveling across the nation. The motorcycle was actually owned by Rodney Alcala, and they were able to find that motorcycle in his possession.
There's no rhyme or reason how these two people, one so good and one not, cross paths and end up there.
I thought we had enough evidence to possibly charge him, but before we did that, I wanted to speak with him.
I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews in my career, but I told myself, how the hell do you interview a serial killer?
It's 2016, 6 years after Rodney Alcala has been convicted for the murders of Robin Samso and the other women. He's 73 years old and his health is failing. He's confined to a bed at Corcoran State Prison, and that's where Wyoming officials come to confront him for the murder of Christine Thornton.
As we got in there, it was dingy-colored peach in Alcala's medical cell.
It was like something off a horror movie, paint peeling off the walls, flies buzzing around the room. It's something that I'll never forget, seeing him lying in his bed. And I remember looking at him going, this is him. I identified myself, read him his rights, and we started pulling out photographs of the original crime scene.
Now he knew why we were there.
Does this area look familiar?
Part of the area.
What do you mean by part of your area?
My name is I couldn't. It's scary.
I couldn't believe it. It's almost like it's his killing field. We also showed Rodney Alcala the picture of Christine seated on the back of his motorcycle, and it gives me chills even today to remember his reaction.
Talk to me about the picture.
What picture?
The picture that you're pointing at. What's on your mind? Talk to me. God, talk to me. Tell me about that girl.
He took his finger and he started tracing her body on the photograph. And then he started tapping on the photograph and kept doing that for a couple more minutes.
That's a guy who wants to relive it again. It empowers him, right? He would relive that.
You could see his eyes moving in his eyelids, almost like he had relived that moment. That entire moment for however long it lasted with Christine out in the desert.
Do you know her? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Do you remember taking this picture?
Yes.
Okay. Now the question is, Mr. Alcala, how did she end up dead? Did you kill her? Yes or no, sir?
When it comes to the big question, he's not going to give it to you. But we got him to admit that he was there. And we got him to admit that he knew Christine. And that's all we needed.
So Rodney Alcala was eventually charged with first-degree murder in Sweetwater County, Wyoming.
They informed me that he was not able to travel without great expense. And so I made the decision that I was not going to try to bring Alcala back to stand trial in Wyoming.
best place for Rodney Alcala is exactly where we left him. Seeing that jail cell and that setup that he's in, he's where he needs to be.
It was disappointing that we weren't going to get a conviction on her murder, but the good thing about all of this is that this man has been brought to light as being a serial killer. His victims are still out there.
Over the years, Rodney Alcala was given multiple opportunities to disclose those victims, whether part of plea deals, to avoid the death penalty, but he continuously refused to give up that information.
He has memories that he has kept secret from everyone.
That power gives him gratification, and him having the information on victims and us not knowing it, that's something he wants to take to his grave.
A trailblazing local businesswoman, beloved by her community.
She was effervescent. She just had a glamour about her that was just unique.
She took pride in who she was.
Savagely murdered in her own home.
This person was so enraged that they just kept stabbing and kept stabbing and kept stabbing.
She had been hit in the head to the point that it actually had changed shape. We're looking for something that's got an edge on it, but that can snap bones.
Detectives uncover a trail of secrets and lies.
He couldn't explain things, and he failed the polygraph miserably.
What kind of animal is this person?
And chase a killer that stays one step ahead of them.
They fled to another country.
Until a series of stunning revelations leaves an entire town in shock.
Everyone was a suspect, and everyone was afraid.
Here comes some guy out of the blue telling us that he's the one who committed the murder.
You would think there's just a serial killer or somebody crazy running around.
I was like, how could we have gotten this wrong?
Two hours southwest of Louisville, Kentucky, lies the quiet town of Madisonville.
Madisonville, Kentucky is a small community. It's built on coal mines and agriculture.
It's a close, tight-knit community.
There's not a lot of crime in our area.
They call themselves the best town on earth, and for the most part, they truly believe that.
On January 13th, 2003, Madisonville police receive a call from an elderly man for a wellness check on his 85-year-old fiancée, Anna Mae Branson.
Her fiancé, Dr. Bob Fenneman, was afraid that she may have fallen or that she had had a stroke of some type.
He knocked on the door and couldn't get her to answer. And that's when he became worried. And he called Anna Mae's brother and the local police department.
An officer meets Anne's fiancé and brother outside her house. Finding a backup key under a bush, they enter the home to look for her.
The patrol officer went in one direction. Dr. Bob Fenneman was looking around, and Earl Winstead, her brother, went down to the basement. When he got to the bottom of the basement steps, he said, "I found her." It appeared at first though she could have fallen. But then upon seeing all the injuries to her body, it was obvious that Miss Branson had been murdered.
Homicide investigators are called to the scene and are shocked when they arrive.
Miss Ann was a friend of my mother's, and it was quite devastating. She was on her stomach. Her legs were extended. She had many, many stab wounds to her back.
She had been hit in the head to the point that it actually had changed shape.
Looking at the body, detectives start building a theory of what happened.
She had defensive wounds on her forearms, then she was knocked down. That's when the perpetrator really went to work.
Her head was facing the small chest type freezer. There was actually 2 types of blood spatter on the freezer next to her head. One was like a striking motion, and one was a golf type swing, where the spin-off from the blood spatter actually landed on that.
I can remember thinking that the perpetrator must have used 2 different weapons. The weapon was not only going through flesh and organs, going through bones, and was coming out on the floor underneath her. It was unlike anything that we'd ever seen or heard of before.
Why was this defenseless woman attacked so viciously? Detectives continue their search for evidence.
At the time, we didn't see anything stolen.
All of her large carat jewelry were on her finger and had not been touched.
The amount of damage she sustained suggests that the attacker was emotionally attached to her.
You think about someone leaving the area, dripping blood from, their arms, and not to find any blood on the door frames, handrails. It was surmisable that person had taken the time to clean up the crime scene.
But other than the evidence on the freezer and the amount of damage that she had sustained, there was no other real clues.
News of Ann's death spreads quickly in the small town.
I got the call that Ann had been murdered. And not just murdered, but unbelievably, brutally murdered. It's just something that you see on the news, but it's not real until it happens in your family.
I just felt like a ton of bricks had fallen on me. Having someone who was a second mother to me killed in such a horrible way is just overwhelmingly devastating.
Anna Mae Winstead was born in Madisonville on November 30th, 1917. And from the beginning, she stood out from the crowd.
Ann was effervescent. She just had a confidence about her, a glamour about her that was just unique.
Anna Mae was a very flamboyant lady. She had a zest for life.
In 1935, Ann married her high school sweetheart, Carol Branson.
When Anna Mae and Carol were first married, they were poor. During World War II, Anna Mae was a Rosie the Riveter, working on fighter planes.
But that was just the start for her. After that, she liked business, and she stayed in the business world.
In 1950, the hardworking couple used their savings to buy a Dairy Queen franchise.
The center of the town was the Dairy Queen, and everyone went there for date night.
Miss Ann, as a boss, was a demanding person, but she also made you feel like you were part of the family there.
They literally became multimillionaires through this Dairy Queen.
When Ann's husband, Carol, died in 1994, Ann was ready to take on a new business challenge.
She would get these older houses, and then she would make them fabulous, and then she would rent them.
Anna Mae was one of the most successful business people that I've ever known, even in her older age.
Ann was generous with her renters, and she was generous with her family. And everyone knew that they could borrow money from Ann, but they would have to pay it back.
Anna Mae was so much of a businesswoman that she kept a ledger with information about people that owed her money.
In her later years, family and business weren't the only things in Ann's life. Several months before her death, Ann had met retired eye surgeon Dr. Bob Fenneman.
Dr. Bob lived in Evansville, Indiana, about 50 miles from Madisonville. When she and Dr. Bob first started dating, she said, "Well, I've got a boyfriend." The very last thing that Anna Mae acted like was an old lady. When I found out that she was murdered, that just totally shocked me.
At the crime scene, detectives examine the rest of the house for clues.
There were no signs of forced entry into her residence.
Nothing was ransacked, like somebody was searching for something. We didn't have any idea who would have committed such a violent act on an 85-year-old woman.
What kind of animal is this person?
While forensics continue their work, detectives speak to the two men who alerted police, her fiancé Bob and her brother Earl.
Earl was asked to establish a timeline for that Sunday, and he had provided an alibi where he was with family at the time of the murder, and the family did substantiate his whereabouts.
What about Ann's fiancé? Could he have had a reason to harm her?
A homicide of this magnitude, you need to ask who's in a relationship with this victim. When we interviewed Dr. Bob Fenneman, he was emotionally distraught.
Dr. Bob did ask Ann to marry him. She did accept his 3-carat diamond ring, but she had not set a date. They had talked about whether they would have some sort of agreement because she did have a lot of money, but she was kind of hesitant.
Police want to know, had Ann's hesitancy about Bob caused him to turn against her in a violent rage?
This person was so enraged that they just kept stabbing and kept stabbing and kept stabbing. To inflict that many injuries, this was a personal crime.
Coming up, buried secrets are brought to light.
We all thought he was a family man, thought he was a churchgoer.
She explained that her alibi had been coerced.
While detectives unearth suspects with violent pasts.
He had several assaults in his past.
We're starting to think, hey, you know, this could be our guy.
They had already stabbed another woman. We would never have dreamed who the killer was.
Detectives are investigating the horrific murder of elderly millionaire Ann Branson. Forensics suggests it was a crime of passion.
Dr. Bob, even with his age, we did feel could be a viable suspect.
Dr. Bob was from Evansville, and he drove all the time to Madisonville to court Ann, but she had not yet decided whether she was going to get married.
Had Ann's reluctance turned Bob against her?
Dr. Bob Fenneman was asked to establish a timeline and provide us with an alibi.
The day before Miss Branson was murdered, she had gone to Evansville, Indiana, to meet up with Dr. Fenneman to go to a dance. And after the dance, Miss Branson returned to Madisonville.
Sunday, he said he attempted to call her and she didn't answer the phone.
It was shortly before 10 o'clock that evening, and Dr. Fenneman said that he presumed that she had gone out or that she had gone to bed early.
So the next day, he said he became worried, and he said that's when they discovered the body at the bottom of the staircase.
Detectives learned from speaking to her family that Ann had been to an evening church service on Sunday.
Miss Branson's estimated time of death was on that Sunday evening after she returned home from church. Dr. Bob said that he was at home in Evansville, Indiana.
Taking no chances, investigators search his phone records.
Phone calls placed Dr. Bob in Evansville, Indiana, so he would not have been in the area during the time frame of the murder. He did not have the opportunity to murder her. It just wasn't feasible for him to have committed the crime.
After clearing Bob as a suspect, they ask if he can think of anyone who would harm his fiancée.
Dr. Bob recalled that her handyman, Wayne Shelton, had borrowed money from Miss Ann in the past, and the amount was more than what a handyman should be borrowing from his employer. Mr. Shelton also owed child support. He was trying to provide the court system a statement that she would guarantee his employment, and Ms. Branson did not feel that she could guarantee him employment. So she had concerns over it.
The fact that the maintenance man had a financial relationship with the victim made him a person of interest that we wanted to talk to.
Detectives contact Wayne Shelton and ask him to meet them at Ann's house.
Wayne Shelton came to the crime scene when we were there, and I explained to him the circumstances of what had occurred. He was extremely shaken. He was in disbelief.
Police cut to the chase and ask Wayne where he was on the night Ann was murdered.
His alibi was he was in another county visiting with his daughter during the murder of Ann Branson.
Knowing Wayne's alibi is weak, detectives take him to the station for a polygraph. But there's just one problem.
Wayne Shelton had a heart condition. It was so fragile that it kept him from even being able to take a polygraph.
So the polygraph examiner refused to give Mr. Shelton a polygraph.
Frustrated by this setback, Ann's nephew, Jack Branson, a retired FBI officer, pulls some strings.
Mary and I hired a retired FBI polygrapher, and Wayne Shelton said, yes, I'll be polygraphed.
Jack's polygrapher takes Wayne Shelton carefully through the test questions.
Wayne Shelton passed the polygraph with flying colors. So at that point, we were able to say, okay, he passed the polygraph. He did not do it.
As investigators search for new suspects, news of the savage murder puts the whole town on edge.
This had been a little town where literally people didn't lock their doors. And all of a sudden, everyone was a suspect and everyone was afraid.
The community needed to know if they had something to fear. So it was pressure all the way around to get this crime solved.
As word spreads, police begin to receive tips from the public.
We received a tip that there was a black pickup truck at the residence after 12 at night.
Could the black truck belong to the killer? Investigators ask Ann's family if they know anyone who drives such a vehicle.
We kept hearing about a crazy tenant that drove a black truck.
What detectives learn about Ann's tenant concerns them.
Robert Prince had characteristics of a mentally unstable person.
He would actually call her in the middle of the night and say that he had ghosts up in his attic, and would she please get rid of the ghosts?
Ann always said she was nervous around him, and she didn't like it when he came to the house, and he called her at all hours of the day and night.
Miss Branson had received several complaints from the neighbors asking that she evict Mr. Prince from his apartment, and she didn't want to move him from that location.
The family would say, don't become so involved with him.
Had Ann's attempt to move Robert prompted him to attack her?
If Robert Prince was mentally unstable and became angry at her, could he have caused her death?
Detectives investigating the slaughter of Ann Branson have discovered she had been involved in a dispute with a volatile tenant.
Robert Prince would call Mrs. Branson at all hours, saying crazy things to her, wanting her to come over. They had warned her not to go over there by herself.
Due to his mental instability, he did pose a great concern for us to investigate.
Searching their database, detectives find alarming information about their new suspect.
Robert Prince was found to have had a violent criminal history. He had several assaults in his past, and he could express a lot of anger towards someone else.
Police obtain a warrant to search his home.
What we were looking for is the murder weapon. I'm looking for something that's got an edge on it, but that can snap bones and go completely through the victim's body. And I'm looking for any clothes. There's no way that the perpetrator did this without getting some of the blood on himself. But we weren't able to locate any of the items that would be of interest to us in this case.
Despite the lack of physical evidence, detectives bring Robert Prince into the station for questioning.
When he was taken from his residence and interrogated, he did not want to answer any questions to do with his prior criminal history. And upon initial confrontation with Robert Prince, he was extremely agitated.
As he starts talking, we're picking up on his violent tendencies. We're starting to think, hey, you know, this could be our guy.
Detectives note that Robert's right arm is injured.
Even though he's a man that could inflict this kind of punishment, he can't bend his right arm. And we asked him, so you right-handed or left-handed? He said, I'm right-handed.
Detectives wonder, could Robert have hurt his arm attacking Ann?
He said he was in another state at the estimated time of death for Miss Branson.
Robert Prince gave the alibi that he was with some family in Tennessee and that he had stopped in a convenience store and got some gas and got a soda or something.
With nothing concrete linking Robert to the homicide, police have to let him go, and detectives get to work checking his alibi.
We contact that convenience store, pull surveillance video, and lo and behold, there's Robert Prince on camera.
And in addition to that, prior to Miss Branson's murder, Robert Prince had surgery to his elbow area and his arm, and according to his doctor, if he had inflicted those injuries upon Miss Branson, then all of his staples and his stitches in his arm would no longer be intact. So the alibi and surgical area just ruled him out as a suspect.
Back at square one, detectives are relying on the autopsy to break open new leads.
The autopsy revealed that Mrs. Branson was stabbed about 97 times throughout her body. Her skull was pulverized. She was beaten so badly that a lot of the stab wounds were actually inflicted after she had passed away.
The evidence technician said that we're not talking about just a regular old steak knife. That's something that's very heavy because the blade is going through her bones, through her organs, and was coming out on the other side.
While the autopsy fails to identify an actual murder weapon, it gives a clear estimate of Ann's time of death.
There was a pot on the stove, which she had baked her supper. She had eaten. We were able to analyze the food in her stomach. And based on the absorption rate principle, the time of death for her was approximately 30 minutes after she got home from church.
It was determined that her time of death was between 7 and 7:30 p.m.
As police continue their search for the killer, Ann's family struggles with her death.
Mary and I walked over to Earl's house to see how he was dealing with the grief. And his son, Russell, took us in to see Earl.
The whole family was in shock, and everyone was just questioning who could have possibly done this.
Earl and Russell, they were both saying, we'll be glad when we found out who did this. And we understood that was exactly how we were feeling.
As the family grieves, Madisonville residents question whether their town really is the best town on earth.
When the town found out that Miss Branson had been murdered, it scared a lot of people because you would think there's just a serial killer or somebody crazy running around to have done that.
This is Madisonville, Kentucky, coined best town on earth. You cannot have an unsolved murder of one of its most prominent members. It can't happen.
As detectives contemplate their next move, an unexpected tip sends the case in a new direction.
We're day 4 or 5 into this investigation, but we have nothing strong yet. And then we get a phone call.
That was the pivotal turning point.
The caller is a local mine worker named Jeff Hibbs.
Jeff Hibbs has some information about one of Anna Mae's nephews, Russell Winstead.
That phone call basically shocked and rocked our investigation.
5 days after the bloody murder of 85-year-old Ann Branson, police are contacted by a man named Jeff Hibbs, who makes a stunning allegation.
Jeff Hibbs believed that Russell Winstead had some involvement with the murder of his aunt, Anna Mae Branson.
Russell Winstead was known as a coal miner, a hard worker. He had 3 sons. He was married to Terry Winstead. It was known that he and his family attended church regularly.
Jeff claims that Russell has a secret unknown to his family.
Jeff Hibbs told us that Russell Winstead had an extreme gambling addiction.
He also tells detectives that he'd gone gambling with Russell a few nights before Ann's murder.
Russell told Jeff he had gotten a loan from his aunt that he had to repay by Monday morning, and that he had $9,700, and he lost every single penny of that money.
Russell told Jeff that they're all going to know about his gambling addiction because his aunt is going to expose him for borrowing money from her on a regular basis and not paying it back.
Jeff tells police that on Monday, the local headlines grabbed his attention.
Jeff Hibbs reads about this old lady that got murdered in Madisonville.
And he was like, oh my gosh, this is the aunt that Russell had to repay by the first of the week.
Detectives go back to Ann's house to search for evidence.
On our second search, I found a ledger and the large amount of loans that was written down for one nephew. They totaled up almost $100,000. The day before her murder, she had actually written down that he had received $9,700 from her and that he had paid her a check for $12,000.
Detectives believe that Russell had given Ann a check in hopes of winning enough at the casino to cover it. But when the check is nowhere to be found, detectives subpoena his bank records.
Upon the financial investigation, it was determined that Russell was basically shifting money around to cover the loans from his aunt. And the missing check for the $12,000 never cleared the bank.
10 days after the homicide, detectives interview Russell Winstead.
Even when we told him that Miss Branson had put it in her ledger, Russell still denied any knowledge of that check. He denied having any involvement in this whatsoever. At the time of death, Russell explained that he had gone to church and that upon leaving church, he had dropped his children off at his ex-wife's house, and then that he was at home in the basement.
Russell said he got home about 7:25 p.m.
With Ann's time of death estimated between 7 and 7:30 p.m., detectives interview Russell's wife, Terry, to verify his alibi.
Terry's explanation for Russell was down to the minute.
She said, yeah, we went to church. We drove separate. He dropped his son off at his ex-wife's house, and then he got home 7:25.
Russell had a solid alibi. His wife told the exact same story he did as to where Russell was on the night of Mrs. Branson's death.
There's just one loose end for detectives to tie up: Russell's casino visits.
I asked, you know Russell gambles, right? And she's like, yeah, I know he gambles. I was like, on a bad night, what do you think he loses? And she's like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000. I was like, try 38,000 on one night. And then she started bawling.
This was just devastating to her because she trusted Russell.
That same day, police get a search warrant for Russell's home.
We didn't find the murder weapon. We didn't find any clothes that were bloodstained. But we did recover a couple of burner cell phones that his wife didn't know even existed.
One of the cell phones was only used to contact a waitress at one of the casinos.
Russell had a girlfriend who worked at the casino.
So we talked to the waitress, and it alarmed us somewhat that even after he's a suspect of interest in a murder case, Russell was still continuing to go to the casino, still trying to be the high roller.
Russell has plenty of secrets. But do money problems and infidelity make him a killer?
Russell's father, Earl, told me the police are trying to jam Russell up because they need a suspect and they want to solve this case.
When we found out that Russell had been living a literal double life, we were shocked. But we felt that there was no way Russell had not done this. We believed it with all of our hearts.
But as they dig deeper into Russell's gambling, detectives find evidence of a man out of control.
We come with a total of 236 times that Russell had visited a casino in the last year, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in that time frame.
When it's rolled up into one, you're just like going, who is this guy?
The scope of Russell's betrayal prompts his wife, Terry, to kick him out of the house and return to police with a damning admission.
Terry explained that her alibi had been coerced.
She said that Russell is the one that told her what to say.
She explained that Russell actually did not come home around 7:30 p.m., that it was more like 9. So that put him as being a person that could have committed this murder.
Investigators obtain a warrant for Russell's arrest, but when they go to bring him in, they're in for a shock.
Russell Winstead had fled the country. We were very concerned that he would not be brought to justice.
When I found out that Russell Winstead had fled, it was my goal to get him, no matter what the cost, manpower, what it took.
The prime suspect in the murder of Ann Branson is her nephew, Russell Winstead. But before investigators can make an arrest, Russell goes on the run.
For Russell to have fled the country, it was shocking to all of us.
An innocent man doesn't flee like that. This is the last straw, and he has to come back.
I have never been a person that takes waiting very well, and our son came up with the idea of putting this case on America's Most Wanted.
If you've seen Russell Winstead, please call our hotline tonight, 1-800-CRIME-TV.
They aired the show February of '05, and then in May of '05, Russell was spotted at a casino in Costa Rica.
He was living under a pseudonym. He was still bouncing from female to female, and he was living the lifestyle that he attempted to live here.
We knew where he was. We wanted justice.
There's just one problem. With Russell facing a potential death sentence at home, Costa Rican authorities refuse to hand him over.
Costa Rica will not extradite anyone to the United States where the death sentence is a possibility. And also, they have gambling. So Russell had done his homework big time.
While investigators strategize how to get Russell back to Kentucky, they make a troubling discovery.
We found out that Russell's father, Earl, had been providing Russell with monies for his lifestyle in Costa Rica.
We had a guy come forward that said that Earl was actually paying him to wire money via Western Union to Russell in Costa Rica. We believed Earl was actually aiding and abetting Russell's flight.
With Earl sending his son proceeds from the estate of the person he murdered, it basically rubbed salt in the wound. It turned your stomach.
Investigators set up a sting to catch Earl red-handed.
So we wired this guy up as a confidential informant, and he met Earl, wired the money, and we got Earl doing that 2 or 3 times.
It was verified that Earl was sending money to Russell in Costa Rica.
While investigators find no evidence that Earl was involved in his sister Ann's murder, they arrest him for helping his son evade justice.
It really struck all of us by surprise. The thought that Russell Winstead's father, Earl Winstead, was sending money down to live on in Costa Rica just sat like a burr under a saddle with me.
I remember Earl being led out in handcuffs because he was arrested for helping a fugitive. But what really hurt us deeply was the fact that we knew it was Ann's money that was paying for her murderer.
Earl eventually pleads guilty to 7 counts of hindering apprehension.
He was placed on probation for 2 years, and if he contacted Russell at any point during those 2 years, then he would have to serve jail time.
While Earl faces legal trouble at home, federal authorities move in on Russell in Costa Rica.
Russell was observed at the gambling casinos. They felt that that was probably the safest place for them to take him into custody. So as Russell was leaving the gambling casino in Costa Rica, he was apprehended.
He was arrested in May of 2005 in Costa Rica. We did not get him back to Kentucky until February of the following year. Extraditing someone back from another country takes a lot of time, and federal authorities had to make assurances that we would not seek the death penalty against Russell.
It took us 7 months to extradite him back to the United States.
To know that it was taking this long was very hard. In fact, every time we'd visit a cemetery where Emma's buried, I'd say, we're gonna get him. We're gonna get him. It was a long, slow process.
Finally, more than 3 years after Ann's murder, Russell Winstead is returned home to face trial for the murder of his aunt.
That day I'll never forget. I went back to Anna Mae's grave and said, we got him. And I felt like a burden had been lifted because we knew what justice was going to be done.
Upon Russell's return to Kentucky, we were preparing for a trial when we got another humongous bombshell as far as our investigation is concerned.
Someone who was also charged with murder of an elderly lady came forward saying that he was the one who had killed Mrs. Branson.
All of this evidence has been stacking up against Russell Winstead. And here comes some guy out of the blue telling us that he's the one who committed the murder.
The confession is contained in a letter posted from Hopkins County Jail by an accused murderer named Fred Roulette.
Fred Roulette basically gives detailed information on the murder of Ann Branson that was never publicly made known. He stated that the murder weapon was a Bradis hammer. It is a mining tool, and he advised that he had modified that.
Fred Roulette provided a drawing of Mrs. Branson's home, and it was eerily accurate.
He gives all of these details that only the killer would know. I was like, how could we have gotten this wrong?
Police have arrested Russell Winstead for the brutal murder of his aunt, Ann Branson. But now accused murderer Fred Roulette has confessed to the crime, leaving investigators reeling.
Fred Roulette was also charged with murdering an elderly lady. So you think, oh my gosh, did we get it wrong?
It was completely devastating. So we were determined we were going to find out the circumstances of his confession.
Investigators throw all their resources into checking the validity of Fred's confession.
Fred was a drug addict, and he could not provide the details of the murder and robbery that he himself had committed to the level of detail that he provided about Mrs. Branson's case.
When investigators check the jail records, they discover a telling detail.
Fred did not come forward until after Russell had been extradited back to Kentucky, and Fred Roulette and Russell Winstead were cellmates.
Already facing 25 years on a separate murder charge, Fred Roulette insists to detectives that he killed Ann Branson.
Fred didn't realize until we told him that if he wanted to confess to this murder, it now packed a death penalty. After Fred heard those words, he was like, oh, no, game's off, gig's up.
That's when he told investigators that he had all the intimate details of the murder from Russell Winstead. Fred Roulette was promised that his family would receive compensation. Since he was going to be in prison for the additional murder, so Fred Roulette agreed to take the false confession.
With Russell's deception exposed, his trial can proceed. In July 2007, 4 years after Ann's murder, a jury hears what really happened on that Sunday night in January 2003.
Mrs. Branson had loaned Russell upwards of $100,000. And Mrs. Branson notated in that ledger was that she had received that $12,000 check from Russell on Saturday. As partial repayment of the loan, Russell had a large sum of money that he lost in the casino, and he made mention that he needed to pay back to his aunt on Monday. Russell knew he could not make good on that $12,000 check.
I believe that Russell Winstead was so desperate that he went over and he attempted to talk Miss Ann into tearing up the $12,000 check. When that didn't work, I believe that he lost it and that he snapped.
And that's when she started receiving all the damage to her, the 65 plus stab wounds to her back. We still do not know to this day how many times Anna Mae Branson was hit in the head.
He cleaned up the crime scene, and he felt that he could get away with murder.
Russell Winstead is convicted of murder and first-degree robbery. He is sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
We all thought he was a family man, thought he was a churchgoer, but he was leading a secret life when he was off work, gambling. Hid it from the family, hid it from his wife.
We would never have dreamed who the killer was. Of all the people that we could have looked around in a crowded room and said, that's the person, it would not have been the person that ended up being the killer.
When they announced the verdict, relief washed over me like Niagara Falls, a relief that this jury saw through Russell Winstead, and he did not fool them.
Finally, Miss Ann got her justice, and everybody who loved and knew her got a form of justice.
I miss Ann every day. And
police emergency.
It's an emergency. I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. I'm completely dead.
It was fairly obvious this was going to be a big story.
We've spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run.
That type of thing doesn't happen around here. Why was this little old lady killed?
This is a murder.
Nestled beside the River Itchen sits the pretty hamlet of Brambridge,
Brambridge is typical of these tiny little hamlets that have got very, very few homes there. Everyone really knows everyone. It's a very friendly kind of place, and you've got your little store, and all community life is around those areas. It attracts a lot of visitors simply because of the River Itchen. There are lovely walks along the river there. Again, one of the most beautiful spots in England. Brambridge is most definitely one of the loveliest.
This picturesque part of Hampshire often attracts a slower pace of life.
It was always predominantly sort of an elder generation place, so people around here were sort of over 50s, 60s.
The community is an aged community. It's not an awful lot of very young people. There are some young people, of course, homes with kids and so on, but the majority of the community is older people.
The Hampshire Hogs, as they're known, they're very proud of their area. The local people who have been here for generations. And, yeah, like everywhere where it's village life, it's lovely.
At the very edge of Brambridge lived a wealthy 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds.
Everything that was said about Georgina Edmonds was just a lovely, lovely lady. Well-liked and loved by everyone that knew her, very close to her family, very friendly, and just a charming old lady.
She had grandchildren that she really enjoyed playing with, was always up for a bit of a laugh. Her grandson was a budding filmmaker, and he would make funny little videos at Christmas, and Georgina would star in those as well. And she enjoyed life, you know, she was still very independent, she was still mobile. She drove her car, she would go down to the shops, but she had assistance with that as well.
Well, I knew her because one of the jobs I did at work was, to take the groceries to the dear old souls who couldn't get around. I know she always had her little dogs with her, rather sweet little things. Very, very friendly. They used to stand up at the window and look out of the window. She was a delightful person, and nothing to say about her that wasn't nice.
Georgina lived in a large gated estate on the edge of the river.
The Edmonds family were well known in the area. It was Georgina's husband who had founded the family business importing coffee.
Very well-to-do family. Harry, her son, worked in London. The business, I believe, was in Basingstoke. But again, most of the time, they were up in London working hard and would come back to Hampshire at weekends, for rest.
When Georgina's husband sadly passed away, she downsized into the smaller house on the estate.
She moved into the cottage, which is your chocolate box cover cottage itself.
Nice little house, amongst the trees, by the river.
Her son, Harry, took over running the business and moved into the larger house, as you would when you reach an older age. You don't want the bother of all the dusting.
Georgina seemed happy in her new home. But in January 2008, life in the community changes forever.
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just come down to my house. My mother has a cottage 100 yards away.
Right.
I've got no reply from her. I've come in through her bedroom window, which was unlocked. She's lying on the floor in the kitchen, and it looks to me as if she's been hit over the head. She looks as if she's dead.
Okay, calm down for me, sir. What's your name?
My name is Harry Edmonds. I'm her son. I've just walked in. I came in through the window, and I found the house in complete darkness. I've gone through into the kitchen.
Okay,
I found my mother's body lying there, and I've been out walking her dogs. This looks like a crime scene to me.
Okay, well, try not to touch anything for me.
This is a murder.
Okay, just calm down for me, sir. I'll send someone else for you, okay?
Yeah, please, as soon as possible. I'm afraid she's dead. That's a murder.
It was about 6:15. I was at home, just prepping dinner, and my phone rang, and so I answered the phone, and they said, we've got a suspicious death. I said, OK, tell me about that. And they said, oh, it's an elderly woman been found dead in the kitchen, face down by her son. So I jumped in the car, and it was a miserable, wet, cold January night, blowing a gale, driving through these country roads as we are now.
Paul Barton, Detective Chief Inspector at the time, arrives at Georgina's address, which is already swarmed with a significant police presence.
So just as I'm pulling down here, I could see the blue lights sort of flashing in the pitch black. So I know I'm getting close to it. And then I just come around the bend, and there's some more police activity. A police van and a police car, an ambulance, and some tape here, just across the bridge here. So I just pull in where I'm pulling in now, actually. I walked up the drive. It's a short walk up a gravel drive into the cottage. The kitchen door is on the side of the cottage. I just looked in. I could see, sadly, Georgina was lying there face down with a large amount of blood around her, some stab wounds to her neck. So I was satisfied at that point that we did have something that was a suspicious death.
A murder investigation is launched, and police maintain a secure perimeter in and around Georgina's home.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
I actually want this road completely closed. And it's one entrance in, one entrance out, but I didn't want anyone else coming across in. I certainly didn't want the press turning up and having a look. And so immediately what we call a wider cordon was put on, and we blocked the road so that we had complete control of the area.
That morning, we went out for a walk, and as we crossed the road where it leads to her house, there was a policeman standing there. There was a car, the road was blocked. And I said, can you tell me what's happening on this road? There's been a murder.
When the news broke, it was fairly obvious from the beginning that this was going to be a big story. Neighbours would phone the newsroom and say, can you tell us anything about what's going on?
Everybody was talking about it, wherever you went, everybody in all the shops. And there were police everywhere, and you just wouldn't generally see police presence in that area.
The 15 years that we've been here, we haven't seen or we haven't heard of a murder, except for this one. This is the first one.
I think that was quite worrying, because, you know, why? Why was this little old lady killed? You know, what was the reason? So it just seemed very, very random and horrible.
It became very obvious very quickly that this was a murder hunt that was out of the ordinary, shall we say.
So what led to a murder in this peaceful village? And why would someone want to kill a well-loved member of the community?
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just walked into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
In the picturesque village of Brambridge, the close-knit community has woken up to the news that a much-loved 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds, has been brutally murdered in her home.
It's extremely grim. My mum was 77 at the time and living with us, you know, not very far away. So, yeah, you don't even want to think about it.
It's gone from being a quiet village scenario to then being sort of on the local news, everybody talking about it, what's happened, you know, that type of thing doesn't happen around here.
With a small community in fear of a killer in their midst, it's down to DCI Paul Barton to address the public.
A Saturday morning I was doing my first media briefing, and it was packed, you know, and it was Sky News Live, BBC Live, it was headline news, you know, it was Midsummer Murders, kind of 77-year-old lady murdered brutally. So the nation were interested, and the media were interested.
Under a national media spotlight, Hampshire police are under pressure to work out who would kill Georgina Edmonds and why.
I just start sort of kicking into autopilot. The next thing I'm thinking is, well, who's done this? Who's responsible? Any suspicious incident calls in that area in the last 24 hours? Has the victim been a victim of any other crimes? Is there any sort of domestic violence within the household? What do we know about the rest of the family? What do we know about the neighbours?
Was this a stranger murder? Was this someone, though, that she knew? And in such a small village, how did they get in and out of the cottage without being seen?
With a killer on the loose, the finger of suspicion is on every member of the community.
Everybody asking questions. We had so many people come in the pub at the time. You know, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Do you know who it was? You know.
We go out as the media and knock on doors and try to talk to people and find people that would have known her. When you've only got 5 homes to actually knock on the door, the community, they'll be in shock themselves, actually, about it.
With Georgina's son, Harry, too distraught to speak, it was left to neighbours to speculate what had happened. Had someone targeted her because of her wealth?
They had a beautiful house, they had quite a bit of money in the family. And I just remember that, you know, the money, the big house, the jewellery. It was in a dark, secluded area.
There was nothing else there. There was another house, I think, to the right, I seem to remember. But that's it. She was on her own.
Police conduct a thorough search of Georgina's house for clues.
We were exploring what could have happened. Was it burglary that was the motive? Her credit card had been taken. I believe also a Radley handbag was gone. I think a laptop was gone. But there were other items that were there in the kitchen that were quite valuable. There was monies out, I believe, that were just left. And that seemed rather strange, that this was a burglary that had gone wrong, that the burglar hadn't taken those fairly obvious items that were there.
Police take a closer look at the crime scene, and one significant thing jumps out. There's no sign of a forced entry.
Was this a cover-up? Was it another motive? And so, therefore, had she been targeted in some other way, and it was a pretend burglary, taking just a few things, when a real burglar would have taken lots of things.
With no sign of a break-in, everyone known to Georgina is under suspicion. Could the local community offer clues as to who Georgina may have let into the house?
Trusting. You couldn't have had anyone more trusting. She was that sort of person. She never disputed things, you know, she just trusted people. And sometimes people are a bit suspicious, but she wasn't that type of person.
She was the sort of person, and I guess this is of her age, that would keep her door unlocked. You know, she would talk to strangers. If someone knocked on the door and asked for directions, she wouldn't be suspicious. Probably even offer them a cup of tea and, you know, spend time with people.
With no obvious break-in, detectives are left to speculate whether this was a random attack by a stranger or by someone closer to home.
Quite often, the last person to see the person alive could be the killer. And it is odd that a son comes home and finds their mum dead in a kitchen. I've dealt with other jobs where children have killed parents. You know, they may have been off their face on drink or drugs. There may have been a domestic argument that's then gone too far. He could have had an axe to grind with his mother, and he could have killed his mother, and then he's just made up that he's come in and found her dead.
Police reanalyse the 999 call made by Georgina's son, Harry.
I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
It's a strange call, I have to say. He's very calm, but he says she's dead. I think it's a murder, he says. And I remember, you know, we played that time and time again, and it's gone out in the media as well. And, you know, a lot of people thought that was strange.
Police bring Harry in for questioning to establish his movements in the hours his mother was murdered. He tells detectives he was at work all day and did not return home till 6 p.m.
He was concerned because he hadn't heard from his mother all day, and I think he'd been trying to call her. And he went to the cottage, and it was in darkness. Harry's managed to force open the ground floor window I think into Georgina's bedroom. He climbs in, goes into the kitchen and finds Georgina lifeless on the floor in a pool of blood.
Harry's story is quickly verified. Police are still no closer to establishing who had gained access to Georgina's home. So they release CCTV footage of Georgina the day before her death, which shows her holding a handbag, which is now missing, and urge the public for help.
To be honest, most people were pretty appalled anyway, just the fact that an old lady had been murdered without knowing the detail. And generally, everyone was trying to be as helpful as they possibly could.
Well, it was a huge community thing, and they had big things in the village hall. So everyone got together, they all went out searching. Everybody was sort of part of it. Everybody searched, everyone went and looked, and yeah, all together really as a community.
Despite the community's best efforts, Georgina's handbag isn't found. But post-mortem results help police identify the cause of death. Could this lead to clues as to her attacker?
On one level, the death of Georgina Edmonds pathologically is straightforward. She has been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object. Ultimately, it was identified that that was a marble rolling pin. A heavy weapon, a good sort of thing to use to cause damage. But on top of that, you then have the incised wounds, the cuts to the body, inflicted with a degree of deliberation, and you don't really have defensive type injuries. One conclusion that could reasonably be drawn is that if they're not in a place where they are likely to kill you, that they are an act of torture. There is an attempt to distress somebody and extract information.
Police now believe Georgina was tortured before she died.
It was horrific.
Terrible.
And as more details came out about what the guy had done to her, apparently tortured her, I mean, it got worse and worse.
Eventually, it emerged just the horrible scale of the injuries to Georgina that were allied to trying to find out her PIN number for her credit card.
We established about 5 hours after discovering her body that somebody had attempted to use that Cashpoint card at a local ATM, and we feel that they were trying to get the PIN number out of Georgina.
Police trace CCTV from that local Tesco ATM in nearby Eastleigh, only half a mile away from the murder scene, and see someone attempting to take money out.
They attempted to use the machine a couple of times. I think it swallowed up the card and off it went. So we didn't have a facial image of the person using the ATM machine, but we were confident to say it was a man. And in particular, the user of the ATM machine was wearing a thick fluorescent jacket with a hood up. And the person that approached that clearly knew that that camera was there because they took all reasonable steps to avoid being seen, keeping their head down, keeping the hood up, etc.
Despite his face being hidden, detectives now have an image of Georgina's killer, and the search for this person intensifies.
This is probably someone who was local or had local connections with Eastleigh. Have we had any offenders that have been released from prison recently in that area on licence? Have we got any registered sex offenders or violent offenders that are in that area? Luckily for me, the duty detective sergeant happened to know that there was a bail hostel called Elderfield House, which was pretty much at the end of the road from Brambridge leading into Otterbourne Village. It's the sort of place that you wouldn't expect to find in an affluent village like Otterbourne or Brambridge, and there are some unpleasant people there.
Behind those trees is Elderfield.
You can just see the rooftop over there.
These are people that had done time in prison, and after their term was over, they sent them here.
It was a halfway house, basically.
It's a halfway house.
It was somewhere where they could sort of spend time and sort of rehabilitate and get back into normal life. And they would hang around in groups and get very drunk. And it was not nice. It was quite a bit unsettling.
It is of some concern in that you don't know what's going to happen next.
You would often get some of them escape, or they would then get out and they aren't supposed to be out. Danger, I guess it was described as.
Police questioned the residents of Elderfield to establish their movements on the night of Georgina's murder.
There were 4 people that were unaccounted for that night. I think 3 had come back late. Within 24 hours or so, we declared 4 people as suspects from Elderfield House. And we arrested them, searched their rooms, brought them back to the police station, forensically examined them, and then put them through the interview process.
After hours of questioning, it soon becomes clear to detectives that 3 of the suspects had clear alibis and are released without charge. But the 4th did not return to Elderfield for 24 hours during the night Georgina was murdered. And his clothing is of particular interest to police.
CCTV showed this fluorescent jacket, which was really key. And in our search in Elderfield House, we established that one of the residents who was unaccounted for on the night was wearing a big fluorescent jacket. He had previous convictions for murder or manslaughter. And so he was of particular interest and excitement to the team at that time.
But police are able to verify the 4th man's alibi, and he is released without charge. And with no suspect or clear motive, fear begins to escalate across the local community.
It's unsettling. It's unknown because the police don't tell you exactly what's happening, especially when they say, well, we haven't found him yet, we're still looking out for him, So where is he?
It was quite scary. My family were saying to me, don't go out on your own at night, don't go out to the car park on your own. It definitely makes you change the way you behave, the way you think. For ages, people didn't go to the garden centre. That was really affected by the whole situation, because I just think people thought it was a dangerous area to go to, so they didn't go there.
They were getting more and more concerned and worried that this is someone still here then, is it? Are we to believe that this is a stranger of someone that was passing through, just happened to pick the cottage, just happened to find that the door was open, going there, carry out this terrible crime, and then just drive away and leave the area utterly and completely, and that's it? Or is it more likely that the perpetrator is still here amongst us?
It's been 1 month since much-loved grandma, Georgina Edmonds, was found murdered in her home in Brambridge, and police are yet to charge anyone for the heinous crime.
It was in the media daily, you know, any newspaper stack you saw it. It was on the news, it was on the radio. We had boards up everywhere, and if you lived in the area as well, you couldn't miss it. Everyone knew what was going on.
I think at the time there was an urgency to get this one done, to get it sorted.
The only sighting detectives have is by a Tesco ATM machine in nearby Eastleigh. And so the investigation to find this man spotted on CCTV escalates.
We knew that Georgina's card had been attempted to be used. Then obviously that, for me, becomes an area of concentration for house to house. So we had police patrols in the area, certainly at the Tesco Express. We wanted to capture anyone that was there at the material time. So we obviously pulled the CCTV from the petrol station itself. We could read all the registration numbers of the cars coming in. And then we had the obvious houses sort of adjacent to Tesco Express and then right opposite. And so I decided that we would focus house to house in that area as well, knocking on doors. Again, good old-fashioned detective work.
And it isn't long before one address catches police attention.
There was a raid on a house that wasn't far from where the cash point had been, where the person in the frame had been using the debit card.
There was a particular address not a million miles away from the ATM machine where a man lived up until the point of around about the 11th of January and then disappeared. The inquiries that we did identified that he was Polish and had gone back to Poland. And he may have also had some previous convictions, so I sent the team out to Poland.
Suddenly, the news story goes international.
We had reports that the police had actually gone out to Poland to carry out inquiries.
There was a lot of media interest in this particular case, and then the media were descending on us, and they would put two and two together and come up with murderer fled to Poland and all this. You know, got the community kind of excited, if you like, because they were thinking, oh, great, they finally caught that person.
Police questioned the Polish man regarding his movements on the night Georgina was murdered. Have they finally found their killer?
He was alibied, and also, I think, through DNA as well, we were able to eliminate him from the inquiry.
With the Polish man in the clear, Hampshire police are back in the UK and back to square one. So they release a clearer version of the CCTV footage to the public and suspect the person is a male aged between 16 and 60 with an estimated height of 5'11". The hunt for this man accelerates to new levels.
We wanted DNA swabs from males matching that description to come forward. Our view was, if you've got nothing to hide, come forward.
You can't force people to do that kind of thing. But what this did, of course, was to add to the suspicion in the community. But they would have come forward because feeling, well, if I don't, then suspicion's going to fall on me. I must admit that, in my experience, I've never come across a mass DNA appeal anywhere that I've worked before. It was certainly turning into something that's, well, a modern-day thriller.
More than 2,000 local men have their DNA swabbed, but there are no immediate results, and the case goes cold. Two and a half years later, and Georgina's killer is still at large. But on the 30th of June, 2010, things take a dramatic turn. An arrest is made. And it's a local man. 31-year-old Matthew Hamlin.
We scramble to find out who this man is. He's got a history of violence, and, you know, he's not a nice guy to know.
Matthew Hamlin was known to police. He'd been known for drug usage and also violence in the past. He had a off-on relationship with a local girl. In fact, he'd had an argument with her and resulted hitting her with an ironing board, and she moved out of the home. He had quite a bad drug habit at that time, using cocaine, and we understand he also racked up numerous debts as a result of his drug usage. And so that kind of fitted the profile of somebody high on drugs, desperate, and probably not really thinking what they're doing.
You can understand that the police would be interested in him. He used to walk his dog along the riverbank there and would know the area quite well. So he fitted in one of the profiles, shall we say, for the police.
But what exactly led to Matthew's arrest?
One particularly interesting subject came to them with a couple of bits of evidence. The first was that, despite he denying that he had been in the area on that particular day and time, his phone records were showing that he actually was there.
This person had a mobile phone, and what we could show was that their phone was bouncing off the same cell mast on the afternoon of the 11th of January.
With Hamlin in custody, police waste no time in recording his every word when his mum visits.
The other thing is, I might have an alibi for it as well.
What do you mean?
When they first interviewed me, I ain't got a clue where I was. And Sarah got out her diary and she flipped through, looked at the date, and she said, yeah, you was with me.
I can speak to Sarah.
Yeah. See if she's still going to make that.
I think she was trying to be helpful for him. And I guess, you know, if you think about it, you don't want to think your child is responsible for doing such a grave crime. And so I would imagine she was desperate.
But I haven't spoken to them for ages. I haven't fallen out of them, but I ain't spoken to them. So whether she's still going to say that or not, but I can't remember it. I was off my head all the time. I was drunk. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know where I was 2.5 years ago. I struggled where I was last week.
It was quite clear in that recording that he was trying to manufacture an alibi at that time that would take him out of the area at the material time when Georgina was murdered.
As well as Hamlin's mobile phone pinging on a nearby mast, linking him to the scene, new evidence comes to light, which police believe is even more conclusive.
The other bit was partial DNA that was found on the rolling pin, and also, I believe, on a small part of her clothing. That was a partial match to this particular subject. Putting the two together, and he came right to the top.
Eventually, the scientists were able to show some components of that mixed profile were 2,600 times more likely to be attributable to Matthew Hamlin. We were fairly confident that Hamlin was responsible.
After a manhunt that lasted years, it seems police have finally found their man. And Matthew Hamlin is charged with Georgina's murder. Matthew pleads not guilty, and 10 months later, the trial begins at Winchester Crown Court.
You're nervous, you're excited, you've got the victim's family up in the gallery, your QC opens up the case, you hear what's being said, and you sit back and think, that sounds pretty good. You know, if I'm on the jury, I'd be thinking, guilty.
The prosecution lay out a mountain of evidence against Matthew Hamlin. And after a 3-month trial, the jury returned with its verdict.
When the call came through, I remember the news desk saying to me, it's not guilty. At that moment, it was one of those moments in the newsroom where you get that stunned silence.
They don't happen that often. So when they do, and when it's such an important case like that, you can't really describe it. It's just a punch in the guts, you know. Yes, professionally, you're disappointed for yourself, you know, and your team, but it's the family, you know, you really feel for. And, you know, you do question, could we have done more, you know? Did we have the wrong person, you know? Is there somebody out there that's done this that we haven't caught?
And you think about the community. The community had lived with this for 4 years. They believed that the monster amongst them had been caught and was now going to get his just desserts. And now it wasn't. And according to the court, he's not the monster at all. Well, who is the monster?
Despite a 2.5-year manhunt and becoming Hampshire Constabulary's most expansive investigation, Matthew Hamlin has been acquitted of Georgina Edmonds' murder, leaving her family, the community and the police feeling devastated and in shock.
Well, we're back now to square one. The mystery continues. The courts have cleared him. So who is it? Is it my neighbour? Is it my friend? Is it someone in my family? Is it someone I work with?
You always have to be open-minded, and you have to accept that actually Hamlin didn't do it, and there is someone else out there.
With the case unsolved, the possibility of the killer getting away with murder looms over police.
Are the police looking for anyone else? Is the case closed? And the police were quite adamant that the case remained open, that they were carrying on their investigations.
So obviously we have a debrief. We'll meet with counsel as well. We'll speak with the family. We will conduct a review of that investigation to see if there were anything we missed, anything we could have done, mainly because so lessons can be learned, because once somebody's been acquitted, that's it.
Detectives go back to the drawing board and relook at all the evidence they have collated over the years and examine what went wrong.
We spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run, and the forensic budget was through the roof.
Beforehand, they had looked for his DNA on the marble rolling pin, but graphically there was so much of Georgina Edmonds' blood on that blurred everything, and they got just a partial sample. And then from another small part of her clothing, where again it was a partial sample. I mean, you're asking a jury to put someone away for life on the grounds of circumstantial evidence and also partial DNA. It's too cloudy, and I think juries can then look at it and say, can I actually send a man away for life on evidence here which is not the strongest?
Police spend years looking for new techniques to forensically identify a killer. And they eventually come across a recent form of DNA testing called YSTR, which extracts the male DNA profile from a full DNA profile.
It's a simple process, and it's almost sellotape on clothing and points of the body to remove skin cells. So it's fairly early on in the exhibits that we've taken of the left sleeve of Georgina's blouse, which would have had skin cells on there. And so the decision was taken to look at those skin cells and examine them, because we hadn't done so far. We've done the waistband, but not the sleeve. And then obviously it went for analysis, number crunching, etc. And it came back with a full male profile.
On Thursday, 30th of October 2014, police make an announcement. They have arrested and charged a suspect for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. As a new trial looms, people want to know, who is in the frame? None other than Matthew Hamlin.
This is incredible. They're going to put him back on trial. It wouldn't have been allowed because double jeopardy meant you could not be tried for the same crime in this country that had only been changed a few years prior to that, which enabled this to actually happen.
Despite the double jeopardy rules changing in 2003 and a new stack of DNA evidence, how did detectives manage to get Hamlin's charge over the line?
It's not an easy thing to do for obvious reasons. The defence argued that it's not new evidence, you had it all along, you just chose not to examine it and find it. But actually, it's not evidence until you've actually turned it into evidence. And that was the ruling of Sir Brian Leveson, who heard that at the Court of Appeal, who then quashed the acquittal, and we were able to then go for a retrial.
January 2016, exactly 8 years after Georgina's murder, the second trial of Matthew Hamlin begins at Winchester Crown Court. The prosecution lay out all their evidence once again, including their new secret weapon, the YSTR DNA technique.
We were hoping for a better outcome this time.
It's 1 in 26 million, that DNA, that it's not him.
And when you describe that, you know, there's 26 million to 1 is this person, I think it was a fairly easy decision for the jury to make. Layered on top of that was, obviously, he was a local person, violent background, and obviously the phone was bouncing off the mast at the time.
Despite presenting their new evidence in court, there are many in the community who are unconvinced that Matthew Hamlin is the killer. At the time of the second trial, Matthew is a changed man, leaving behind his days of drug taking, working full-time as an electrician and raising his family. And after a grueling 6-week trial, the jury retires to consider the verdict.
When you do get to court and the prosecution and the defence have had their say and the judge has summed up, you still get a bit nervous, even though you just know in your heart of hearts that it's a really, really strong case.
So we can't speculate, we can't talk to people about, well, you know, what do you think this time? Do you think he's going to get off a second time?
On the 23rd of February 2016, the jury return with a verdict.
8 years after Georgina Edmonds, aged 77 years, was found dead at her home in Banbridge, Matthew Hamlin has today been found guilty of her brutal murder.
It was just a sense of relief and just great work, and so many people, bear in mind this investigation had gone on for years really, and so many people have got involved in that investigation. But it was just such a nice feeling.
Throughout this entire investigation, we have been absolutely determined to prove beyond reasonable doubt who committed this horrific crime. After the discovery of new evidence and presenting it to the Court of Appeal, we were able to try Matthew Hamlin again for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. The whole prosecution team were determined to find justice for Georgina, and today that has been achieved.
Being stood there listening to Harry address the media and just say some really nice words about me and my colleagues and Hampshire Police and all the work that we had done to get justice for the family. So yeah, just a great feeling.
The entire team of police officers, police staff, prosecution barristers, forensic scientists and colleagues from the Crown Prosecution Service have been absolutely dedicated to putting together the best possible case that could be put before the court and the jury. Every moment has been worth it to see justice finally served and the killer of Georgina Edmonds behind bars. Thank you.
With Matthew Hamlin finally behind bars, the question that still puzzles the community is why would he want to end the life of Georgina Edmonds so brutally, torturing her before battering her to death?
Who can say, and it's difficult for me to speculate. Well, we know now from the court case, although he's never admitted it, that he was short of money, that he had walked along the riverbank and he had found his way in the cottage, whether that was just by pure chance, whether he had seen her walking her dogs and had known that she was gone there and she was a vulnerable old lady. Sadly, whether he would have known or not that the door was left open when he went in. He had tortured her to reveal the number for her debit card by stabbing her something like 27 times and then just leave her there, tie her up or something like that. But then it all got, who knows what it is. But I think what we can tell is that he is a pretty evil, nasty guy who will spend 30 years in prison.
And after 8 long years of fear, can normal life return for the local community?
It's so close to reality for us here that, you know, it's traumatic for all of us in the village.
They're vulnerable too. They're so trusting. I know we all felt very, very sorry for her. Yeah, very sorry.